Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations.com. I'm Mary Beth Temple from Hooked for Life, and in this video we're going to take a closer look at the Crossroads Cable Knit Blanket. Now this blanket is made in Patons Classic Wool Roving. We use the natural here, but of course you can use whatever color you like. You'll need a size US 10.5 or 6.5 millimeter circular knitting needle, 36 inches or 91.5 centimeters long or longer, or size needed to obtain gauge. You'll need a cable needle. I like to use the curvy ones, but you can use whichever kind you like, a straight one or a DPN or whatever you have to hand. And while this is not on the materials list, I also recommend you grab yourself a couple of stitch markers. They can be locking or not locking, but it will help you lay the cables out and figure out where you are when you're working on this luscious blanket. It has tons of texture and 5 different cable patterns, but don't let that put you off. Once you've gotten a few rows down and the pattern becomes easy to read, you'll be cabling like a pro in no time. So let's get started. We're going to take a look at Cable Panel B. Now, to get all the luscious texture out of this Crossroads cable knit blanket, you're going to want to set up to work 5 different cable panels across, depending on where the instructions tell you to put them. As you can see in the photo, the cables change as you go across the width of the blanket. Now, as is the case with most Yarnspirations patterns, we have the individual stitches defined for you on page 1. And in this case, we have the cable panels written out in text and also available in chart form. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the 9-stitch cables on this pattern is that the cable crosses contain both knit and purl stitches, which is a little unusual if you've only done basic cabling before. Most of the times the cable crosses only contain knit stitches. So I'm going to take a look at Cable Panel B. And what I'm going to do right now is move the camera in a little more closely so you can see exactly what I'm doing, and we'll follow along both on the chart and in the text. One more thing I neglected to mention: when you get set up for this, the instructions essentially tell you to cast on 201 stitches, and then they will give you some rows to do borders with. But then it's going to tell you work first row of cable panel A, then the first row of cable panel B, then the first row of cable panel C, etc. is going to tell you all the way across how to set that up. And this is the place where, as I suggested, you might want to have some stitch markers. You can use locking stitch markers or the round ones, but it'd be really easier for you to mark out the repeats. So particularly when you're getting the cables set up at the beginning, it will be easier going forward if you know what panel you're working on what stitch. The other thing that I like about this pattern is it's telling you how many stitches each cable panel is worked over. So in the case of this demonstration, I'm just working on cable panel B, which is telling us is 28 stitches. If this cabling looks a little bit past your comfort zone, if it's not something you've tried before, it would be completely reasonable to cast on however many stitches you need to cast on and work just a few rows of any of the panels that worry you to get the hang of how the cables work before you cast on your blanket. The last thing I want to mention, a lot of traditional cables are worked with only knitting when the cable crosses happen, when the legs change places. But in this pattern, there is a purl stitch that moves here and there. So I want to make sure you pay special attention to that. So we are on the 3rd row of Cable Panel B. Once again, as with most of the charts here on Yarnspirations.com, you read from right to left on the right side rows and left to right on the wrong side rows. So we are on the 3rd row, and we are on the 3rd row here. So we're going to purl 2, there it is, then knit 4, there's my knit 4, then we're going to purl 1 and CR9F, and we will read that from the definitions on page 1. But let's get the easy stuff out of the way first. So we're going to purl 2, purl 2, knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, And now we are at, in the parentheses, so it's purl 1, CR9F twice. So purl 1, okay, CR9F. Reading from the definitions on page 1, slip next 5 stitches onto the cable needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can use a straight cable needle if you want, or a bendy one like I have, or a DPN that you might have laying around. I like the curvy ones, particularly when I'm making videos, because if I drop it, it doesn't fall out. But just because I'm using the curvy one doesn't mean you have to. So then the next instruction says knit 4. So I'm going to knit 4 from the left hand needle. So I just finished a purl stitch. So I'm going to take my yarn to the back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, here are my 5 stitches that are on the cable needle. It says slip purl stitch from cable needle onto left hand needle and purl 1. So I'm going to take this guy over here and I'm going to put it back on the left hand needle. So I'm just going to move that 1 stitch. So now I have 4 hanging in the front. I need my yarn in the front because I'm going to purl 1. I'm going to purl that stitch. Okay, so there's my purl stitch. So here's my 4 that I still have in the front. And then it says knit 4 from cable needle. So my yarn was in front because I made a purl stitch. Let's get it to the back. Going to knit 4 from the cable needle just like I always would. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is that first cable cross. It's a little difficult to see because it's tight because we just started, but you can see right where my thumbnail is, you can see that purl stitch is going to track up. All right, so let's go back to either our chart or our text. And so we're going to purl 1 CR9F one more time, purl 1 CR9F. And just as a reminder, the F in the cable is front, so it reminds you that you're going to put your cable needle to the front. And later on, we're going to do a CR9B. B stands for back, and that reminds you to put your cable needle in the back. So there's my regular purl 1. Now, we're going to slip 5 stitches onto the cable needle. This is what we just did. We're just doing it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let it hang to the front. I just made a purl stitch, so I have to get my yarn to the back because my next stitch is a knit stitch. I'm going to knit 4 from the left hand needle. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's the only tricky part. I'm going to take the purl stitch, and that's a good visual clue because I can see that that's a purl stitch. So it helps remember which one I'm going to move. I'm going to put that back on the left hand needle, leave the other 4 stitches hanging. I have to bring my yarn to the front because I'm going to purl. I'm going to purl that purl from the left hand needle to the right. Now I'm going to knit 4 from the cable needle, so once again my yarn has to go to the back because I'm going to do a knit stitch. Next, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me get rid of that cable needle. Well, actually, and then I'm going to come to the end of my row, which is right there. So that's going to be a purl 2, and I can see that in the text, purl 2. So I'm going to purl 2, and then I will have finished that row. Might as well do that where you can see it. My yarn's in the front. 1, 2. All right, so again, looks kind of like a twisty mess at the moment, but once again, I know that I am setting up my cables. They'll be a lot more intuitive as I go farther along. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit rows 4 through 8, which do not have cable crosses. So the alternate rows are the same as row 2. So I'm going to keep repeating row 2. That will be row 4, row 6, row 8 will all be the same as row 2. And you can see the 3rd, 5th, and 7th rows don't have cable crosses. So I'm going to go ahead and knit those off camera. Then I'm going to come back for the 9th row. You'll be able to see a little better how the fabric is meant to look. And we'll take a look at that CR9B cable cross. I'll be right back. Okay, now that we have a few more rows on our piece, you can see that first cable cross is way down here at the beginning. But the point I want to really make is that you can see these purl stitches that differentiate the individual legs of the cables. Truly, once you have enough rows on this and you can see what you're doing, it's a lot more intuitive. So follow that pattern blindly for the first bunch of rows, and then it will make way more sense when you can read your knitting. So let's take a look at the 9th row. Following either the chart or the text, we're going to purl 2, 1, 2, and then CR9B, purl 1. CR9B, back. B is for back, so that tells you where you're going to put the cable needle. So let's go back to that page 1. Remember, all of our definitions are here on the first page. Slip next 5 stitches onto cable needle. 1, 2, remember not to twist them when you move them. 3, 4, 5, and leave at the back of the work. So it's just going to hang out on the back. Now we're going to knit 4, so I have to get my yarn in the back because the last stitch that I made was a purl stitch. And get that little guy out of the way. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slip purl stitch from cable needle onto left hand needle. So let's bring the cable needle up. And where's my purl stitch? My purl stitch is on the left hand side. Whew, let's see if I, there you go. Now you can see it a little better. Right? These guys are all knit stitches. So I'm going to take the purl stitch off, just the purl stitch, just like we did before, and put it on the left hand needle. And leave the other 4 stitches on the cable needle, and in this case, leave them to the back. So I have to bring my yarn to the front because my next stitch is a purl. Purl 1. And then knit 4 from the cable needle. So I've got to get that yarn to the back. Bring those 4 stitches up on the cable needle. Okay, let me just stop so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, and then knit 4 from the cable needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then purl 1, because we did the CR9B, purl 1 twice, and you can see that also on the chart. There's the cable and the purl 1. So there's that purl 1. So let's do that CR9B one more time. Okay, take 5 stitches and put them on the cable needle without twisting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Drop them to the back of the work. Knit 4 from the cable needle. 1, 2, 3, 4. Move the purl stitch, which is on the left hand side. Move the purl stitch onto the left hand needle. Leave the other 4 stitches on the cable needle. Okay, there's my 4 stitches hanging out. Bring the yarn to the front so I can purl that stitch. Purl. Yarn to the back because I'm going to knit the next 4 stitches. I'm going to knit those 4 stitches off the cable needle. One, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let me get that cable needle out of the way. And purl 1. And then I should have 6 left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And reading my stitches or the chart or the text, it's going to be knit 4, purl 2. Other than the cable crosses, you work the stitches as they appear. You knit if it looks like it should be a knit stitch, and you purl if it looks like it should be a purl stitch. There's nothing just the least bit fussy about this except the cable cross rows. Okay, so that is the end of the 9th row, which is my second cable cross, and now we have something. You can really see the texture start to build up, but again, you can see how those purl columns track with the individual legs of the cable and define them. So it just gives you a deep, rich texture to the stitch, and it's a lot of fun to do. So keep going. Keep your practicing if you're practicing. Other than that, just follow along either with the written instructions or the charts, depending on your own preference on knitting cables. I hope you had a wonderful time learning about the Crossroads Cable Knit Blanket. I'm Mary Beth Temple from Hooked for Life. We look forward to seeing you again real soon here on Yarnspirations.com.